Hello. On behalf of the Boston Asian American Film Festival, a co-presentation of the Asian American Resource Workshop and Arts Emerson, welcome to the post-film conversation for our opening night film, A Tale of Three Chinatowns. I'm Susan Chinson, the establishing director of the Boston Asian American Film Festival and creative producer at Arts Emerson, and I'll be hosting today's Q&A. We chose this film for opening night because of its timeliness and its amplification of the resilience of Boston's Chinatown, recognizing the organizations and the people beyond the storefronts and the transactional relationships that most have with this neighborhood. It also exemplifies our theme of the festival, Rising Together. As we consider how we rise together, I'd also like to mention the co-collaboration between Arts Emerson and the Asian American Resource Workshop. Through the Resource Workshop, we are able to stay connected to the grassroots and the pulse of the community. And through Arts Emerson, we've been able to expand our capacity and provide sustainability in this relationship. During COVID, I'd also like to recognize that it's been a tremendous hurdle for all of us to kind of get through to being able to present a virtual festival last year and again now this year. And we hope that it will return back to our in-person opportunities next year. I'd like to give special thanks to our sponsors who have really helped us see us through this storm cloud that we've all been in. Tufts Medical Center, South Cove Community Health Center, Stewart Barnes, Lake Winnipesaukee Golf Club, ARIA Boston, and our opening night sponsor, AARP Massachusetts. And saving the best for last, a special thanks to the volunteer staff at BAAFF has made possible, especially the volunteer staff that make BAAFF possible, especially those on the screening committee who have spent countless hours reviewing films to curate this spectacular festival. Tonight's conversation will begin with our filmmakers and continue with a community panel and wrap up questions with from viewers like you. Please use the chat box to post your questions and share them with us. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Lisa Mao, director, and Penny Lee, executive director and editor of A Tale of Three Chinatowns. Welcome, Penny.
Hello. Hi, Susan.
Hi, Susan.
Hi.
Thank you so much for having us.
No, it's so exciting to see you again. I think we last spoke at the Roxbury Film Festival when you premiered in Boston. And we're so excited to have you here for opening night. This film is such a delight and really, I feel like, peels back a lot of the layers that most people don't understand about Chinatown. So this is really, I feel like I learned a lot, and that I'm hoping that other people will have learned a lot as well through this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I know we covered a lot of bases in our initial conversation when we talked at Roxbury Film. That link is still actually available if folks would like to go and visit it. But for those who may not have had a chance to join us for it, I'd like to just start off with maybe a little bit of background and history of the film in the context of how you came to tell this story.
Sure. First of all, thank you for having us. And we're so honored that you chose our film to be the opening night film. So how did we come here? Penny and I worked on a short film about 5 years ago called Through Chinatown's Eyes, April 1968, that looked at the DC riots after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. That film, after we screened it, many people would ask us, well, what's next? What's next? And so we felt like the modern story, like sort of the aftermath of the riots, was the next story to tell. So in looking at DC, we felt like, okay, should we really look at this in a vacuum? Why don't we look at several Chinatowns around the country? And so that's really how A Tale of Three Chinatowns came to be. Penny?
Yeah, we wanted to not focus on the bigger Chinatowns because we felt that the smaller ones needed their stories told too. And since Lisa and I live in DC, of course, we have to cover DC. And we looked at Boston because Boston is the third largest. But then in my research, I found that there wasn't really that much documentation, visually, film or video about Boston's Chinatown. So I thought Boston would be a good one to include. We looked at other smaller Chinatowns like Philadelphia as well. But then we wanted something that is bigger and expanding. So we can have some type of a contrast and comparison to show in the film. And thus Chicago was selected. Lisa's been to Chicago at the time we're talking about it. I haven't been to Chicago at that time. So she was more familiar with the growing community in Chicago. And I said, okay, let's do it. So then we end up with DC, Boston, and Chicago.
Yeah, and I just wanted to expand on that. I mean, DC, we knew that we would do because it's here, and also it's like a dead Chinatown. I mean, you know, right now it's basically box stores, and it's really only Chinatown sort of in characters and sort of in facade. So in researching the film and researching this topic, you know, I met Dr. Andrew Leong, who will be joining us and who was also in the film. And, you know, through talking to Dr. Leong and trying to figure out which Chinatowns to do, I mean, for me as the storyteller, as the writer, I thought, you know, for me, I felt like DC is sort of the ghost of Christmas past. And then perhaps Chicago could be the ghost of Christmas future. And then Boston could be the ghost of Christmas present, the now. So I wanted to show something that was, you know, what could happen if nothing happens, what could happen if activism happens, and then what is happening now, a struggle going on that's, you know, a struggle that is playing out as we speak.
Wow, that's fantastic. I think coming from my place of having been a former staff person at the Chinese Historical Society of New England, I greatly and deeply appreciate this documentation. It really does serve as sort of a crown jewel, I think, for many years to come, for people who are researching. And I'm actually really curious, almost like wanting to see in the future, what path in Christmas do we end up with in the future? Can you share with us a bit more about, you have a tremendous amount of information that you've packed in from both all three Chinatowns and such personal stories. Tell us about how, what was the process in actually making the film in terms of capturing those stories? Like, how many hours of footage did you have? Did you feel like you had to cut a lot? Like, is there things in there that you wish had gotten to make it in, but didn't,
Yeah, we started the film working on it in 2017, actually. And that was in the summer of 2017. I flew out to Boston to do some research and to talk to friends and listen to recommendations on who we should contact and talk to. That was important. And through that, and I was there during the August Moon Festival. And so some of the B-roll I shot, which ended up in the film. So through that research, I made a list. I passed it on to Lisa. We've discussed it. And then in 2018, we kind of checkerboarded a little bit. In 2018, we really focused on DC. So we interviewed the DC participants at that time, but we also was doing research because we had to do research. Whether it's research about the history, and also archival footage, going to the Library of Congress, going to the National Archives, spent a majority of that period in 2017 and 2018 doing research. Then we started shooting in 2019. And I think it was Chinese New Year, January. Lisa took our crew to Chicago. That was 2019, while I stayed in DC for the Chinese New Year in DC. So the shooting happened in 2019. Then we went back to Boston in April to shoot the interviews there. And then we went back and forth. We did some pickups back in Chicago, going back to Boston. And that was all of 2019. We shot about 80 hours of interviews. We had about 40 participants, 40 people that we interviewed. We averaged about between 10 to 14 per city. So we had quite a lot of interviews. And because of so much interviews and stories, unfortunately, many of it didn't make it in the film. And Lisa and I had discussed about, wow, why don't we just go back one day, and then maybe when we do a DVD or something, we can take some of these people's stories and do a condensed version of each person's story, because they're important too. It's like where they came from. How did they end up in Chinatown? So a lot of that got cut. But we had to continue with the storyteller. And maybe Lisa can fill us in on how that came about in terms of having to select out of all these interviews what we're going to use to tell this story.
Yeah, so just to set the table, like both Penny and I have full-time jobs. So for us to work on the film, it was really on nights and weekends and during holidays and like my vacation time. Like I took vacation time to go to Chicago in winter to film the Chicago Chinese New Year parade, and also to film interviews. So we both, like, the film would have been done quicker had we worked on it full time. But I think, again, as filmmakers, we need to make a living. And so, so we, there's that. So yeah, I mean, in terms of the number of shoot days, like it probably took like 15 to 20 shoot days in all. We went to Chicago, Boston, as Penny mentioned. DC is right in our backyard, so we were able to film several times there. We did a pickup shoot at Yale, where one of our experts was. And in terms of on the cutting room floor, yeah, a lot of people's origin stories of how their families came to this country. Details, like I would have loved to have put in more details about just historical acts, like U.S. legislation that affected many of the the people in our film. Everything from the War Brides Act after World War II that helped many, like Eddie's, dad bring his mom over, and so on and so forth. So I would have loved to have gotten into those details, but we just didn't have time. Right.
Yeah.
So like that's on the cutting room floor. Again, origin stories, growing up in Chinatown. I mean, there's so much. And, Penny and I have talked about extensions on the website in our spare time to have, like a blog or sections where we can, sort of have themes. So like themes about food, or themes about, childhood, or themes about playing in the alleyways, themes about people's parents and what they did for a living, things of that nature. So that's a lot of what hit the cutting room floor.
Yeah. So it sounds like what I'm hearing is that you need more funding so that you can continue to tell these stories and edit it and make them available to a wider audience. Because I feel like in the 80 hours that you've collected, you probably have a treasure trove of information that doesn't necessarily exist anywhere else. So
yeah. And to your point earlier about this moment and sort of it being used for people as a resource, when the pandemic came and the world changed, we were in the process of editing our film. And, speaking to Dr. Mary Leo, who's, the historian at Yale, she said, she was like, the film is actually like a time capsule. It was shot right before the pandemic, literally in 2019. Our last interviews were done in 2019, at the end of 2019, and Mary's interview was a pickup in 2020. So getting that together was a little bit crazy because of COVID and all that. But in terms of our stories and what life was like in Chinatown, I mean, literally, it's like a time capsule of what it was like before the pandemic.
Wow, that's fantastic. All right. Well, thank you for all of those insights. we're going to do a transition and bring on the community panel, and then we'll bring you back at the end to kind of do a full wrap up. So now moving on to our next section, I'd like to invite our community panelists, Paul Lee, President at the Asian Community Development Corporation, Andrew Leong, Associate Professor at UMass Boston and Advisor to A Tale of Three Chinatowns, and Lydia Lowe, Executive Director at the Chinatown Community Land Trust. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to start out with actually offering an opportunity for audiences to hear from the three of you, sort of your initial reaction and feedback in seeing the film now as it's completed. And maybe we'll start with Paul.
So thank you, Susan. I thought the film did a superb job of showing what Chinatown was like when I was growing up there. The narrative, the pictures, and I'm not just saying that because my grandfather, my father, and my mother were in the pictures. It also did a nice job of showing the changes in Chinatown caused by urban renewal, institutional expansion, commercial development, as well as the activism that took place in the 60s and 70s. And I also really liked the way, the film dealt with the challenges of preserving Chinatown going forward.
Lydia, how about you?
I just love the film. And I think what I love about it the most is the contrast between the different Chinatowns. It's so rich. And I really love the stories. I think that those stories really give you a sense of Chinatown and grounded, that they're really grounded in the history. So increasingly, I'm really focusing a lot on Chinatown's history and thinking about how that helps us develop our vision forward. So I just really appreciated that a lot.
That's fantastic. And Andrew?
It was really a joyful experience working with Penny and Lisa on the film, on all the little details, despite all the things that we had to cut out. But so in many ways, I feel like this is, on a professional basis, I've worked in Chinatown, all my life. And when I first immigrated to the country in the late 60s, I was in Chicago, Chinatown, living right on Wentworth, with my grandfather. And so in many ways, I feel like it's homage, is a love story in many ways. And this is my contribution, because all those particular stories that you hear coming out of this film is really the reason as to why all of us love and want to protect and preserve and save Chinatown, not just Boston, but all of these Chinatowns.
No, there definitely felt like there was a through line that wasn't specific to these three Chinatowns, but really universal to Chinatowns across the country and probably internationally as well,
Yes.
that people will connect with it.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to add is we did a pre-screening of this, and after the pre-screening, we got to Zoom and meet with some of the players from the other Chinatowns, and there was a real feeling of kinship, and the backgrounds are so similar. I mean, you could take some of those folks from Chicago and Washington and put them in Boston, and they would be your neighbors.
Yeah, I feel like that was one part that I really took away, was that it's like a lot of individuals and their stories and their perseverance that have actually enabled these Chinatowns to do what they do and hold the space that they do. And personally, I'm huge fans of all three of yours and the many others that were featured in the film. So I'm just very touched by all of that, and recognize that from the passion needs to exist in all of those other places too. I'm interested in knowing, this film comes into a space talking about gentrification and sort of the different forces that were sort of playing against Chinatown, especially Boston's Chinatown. And I'm curious to explore a little bit more, or have people understand a little bit more the approach that ACDC and the Chinatown Land Trust take in the path to resisting gentrification. I'm wondering if you could share with us a bit about that style or approach, strategy, whatever you may call it, and how that may be playing out in a current or recent project that you're working on. I'd love to hear more about that. Lydia, maybe if you want to start.
Sure. I think that I know that when you were prepping us, you had said something about how we have very different approaches. And what's interesting is I think that in the recent years, actually, our approaches are coming together more and more. Yeah. At least, we're really working together in a very conscious and unified way around a common strategy, sometimes playing somewhat different roles. But I think, there are a few general principles that are binding us together. Build as much new affordable housing as possible. Preserve existing housing as permanently affordable whenever it's possible. And then protect and improve other parts of what makes Chinatown, Chinatown, particularly in this in this COVID moment, the small businesses, but also parks and open space, library, things that are important to the quality of life. And I think that, recently for Chinatown CLT, one of the things that we helped to lead, that we think has really also helped to bring us together, was the Chinatown Master Plan 2020 process, so that we actually have kind of a shared vision there. And as we worked on that, I think that what started coming out that had not been as much of a focus for us before was this whole concept of Chinatown as a cultural and historic district. And a cultural and historic district, though, that's really anchored by the immigrant working class and the small businesses. Not a precious historic district, where it's like Beacon Hill and Bay Village and everything's focused on architecture and what color you paint your door. But really, how do we use these approaches to keep the heart of that community and its role and the people, that have made it Chinatown? So increasingly, I think that framework helps to bind the work of different organizations. I know that ACDC has done some great cultural placekeeping projects in the last few years, working with a lot of young artists. And we're also entering that space with the Immigrant History Trail project. It's something that, is kind of connecting several organizations. We're exploring the historic district designation and how we utilize zoning. So there's a lot of different ways that we're working together. And I would say that our particular niche for the CLT, it's about community control and shared governance, particularly of land, where we seek permanently affordable housing of some of the smaller row house properties. But it's also taking that approach to other kinds of resources in the community.
And Paul, tell us about ACDC.
Lydia, thank you for that. I think it is very clear that we have a shared goal and shared purpose in preserving Chinatown, preserving the cultural aspects, preserving the affordable housing. ACDC's focus historically over the last 30, 40-year existence has been the larger projects, and we focused on reclaiming land that was taken from Chinatown by urban renewal or for the highway or for commercial development that didn't happen. And so the lots tend to be larger, so our projects are larger. So we've built four different projects in Chinatown, and several hundred units over our history. And the way we look at it is that each one of those projects is an anchor that's anchoring Chinatown, for affordable, with affordable housing for immigrants and for working class folks, and that those anchor projects will be affordable in perpetuity. That's what we're working toward. In addition to that, now you mentioned the placemaking that we're doing. A lot of that is based around this theory of anchoring too. We're trying to, put a stake in the ground in terms of the borders of Chinatown, so that we don't get, more encroachment. And we're doing all this really, we're all working together. A lot of the community projects we're doing in collaboration with the Powell Art Center, with the Land Trust folks. I think in the last couple of years, I think I've seen a lot more collaboration and a lot of unity and working together. And we've shared our expertise in developing housing and real estate construction, with the Land Trust and with other folks and other developers even, of affordable housing, because we're all trying to do the same thing.
Yeah, I definitely have felt that sense too, as a resident in a long time, person connected to Boston's Chinatown, that this generation or this era that we're currently in is probably the most collaborative that I've ever seen, be it with around festivals, projects, art, you name it. It definitely has like a new sense of commitment to working together and being at the table with each other, which I've greatly appreciated. Now, Andrew, I know, Lisa talked about sort of like, what Chinatown Christmas, are we going to have in the future, and recognizing that we're kind of in this vertex of like going potentially one way or another. Are there any things, and actually I'll then open it up to both Paul and Lydia if you have thoughts on this too. What is on the horizon that we should be aware of that may tip the scale, one way or another? What are some of the things that we should, as audience members, as community members, be aware of and sort of have, an ear to?
Yeah, I think, for Boston, we are quite exceptionally fortunate, to have the population, to have the community, to have the organizations that we do that work on these particular issues and struggle, for the future of Chinatown. Whereas other communities, other cities may not be so fortunate. So just up north in Montreal, they have had a hell of a time during the pandemic, okay? And developers are coming in, grabbing up land left and right, historic buildings. And so there's a huge struggle up there in Montreal, Chinatown right now, where we're not certain as to the survivability because it continually, it is shrinking. Whereas maybe 40, 50 years ago in Canada, there were like 25 different kind of Chinatowns, and now they've been reduced to like 12. And the Chinatown in Quebec City is gone, by the 70s, and so Montreal is it for Quebec province. And if we're talking about Chicago, right, one of the particular cities that we had focused in on the documentary, just as we finished filming, they announced the new project, the 78. Because it would become the 78th community, so-called, in Chicago, whereas there's 77 currently. It's developing on 62 acres of land right north of Chicago Chinatown, near the Pingtan Memorial Park. It is going to have 10,000 units of housing. Okay, 10,000. Right? That is huge. That's like a little small city, right? And if you want to talk about the kind of gentrification that's going to happen there, you can't even imagine. And within the past 2 years, they're talking about now putting in a casino, okay, within walking distance.
Wow.
From Chicago Chinatown. So these are all the kind of looming threats that we have, across the board in many other Chinatowns, small and large. Whereas, I'm trying to finish up writing this report right now for Salinas, where the Chinatown is pretty much dead for the city of Salinas, and they're putting together all their resources, all the various different Asian American groups, the Japanese, the Filipinos, the Chinese Americans, as well as the Chicanos. They're all trying to put together because this space meant so much for them, right? Because this space in Salinas Chinatown, just like in other Chinatowns, was sanctuary for all those people that were discriminated against, and that's what they're fighting for, okay? And so that's why I feel like, in Boston, we are so very fortunate to have all the people, that we have in this space fighting for this struggle.
That's great.
I do see, some really big challenges on the horizon. I think, real estate speculation and the, level of property turnover. In the year before the pandemic, 87% of property sales were cash sales. And we know who's making those cash sales. It's or purchases. It's not, it's not your average homeowner. The pandemic, I think, has brought a really big threat to our small businesses and the future of the small businesses. And then I think we're all much more aware of the threat of climate change. It's here now in terms of, the threat of heat, power outages, et cetera. So those I think are some pretty big challenges. But on the positive side, we are about to have a new mayor. And we don't know yet who exactly will be the new mayor, but I think we can look forward to. I think we can look forward to a mayor who is committed to the survival of Chinatown.
Yeah, I think the key is really that Chinatown needs to actively fight for its existence. I think history has shown that if we fight, that we can overcome a lot of the challenges. The big challenge, if you go back 30 years, the big challenge to Chinatown, nobody wanted to live in Chinatown. If you were affluent, right, it was considered bad land. But the big challenge then was institutional expansion, Tufts Medical Center. And you saw in the film that the community rose up and demonstrated and got control of Parcel C, which ultimately turned into the Metropolitan, which AC/DC developed. And then now, of course, we've turned Tufts Medical Center into an ally. They're a sponsor of this film festival. So they're an ally now. In terms of gentrification, that is a major issue. But I think things changed. With the pandemic last year, all of a sudden the wealthy people didn't want to live in the city anymore. Now that's going to change. It's going to come back. But there are ebbs and flows. So we have to be alert to the ebbs and flows. And like last year, if we were all prescient and if we had the resources, we should have been in Chinatown buying up property before it got expensive again. But you never do that though. You never buy when it's low like that, because who thinks of that? But if we're vigilant and if we work hard and we work together, I think we can beat back a lot of these challenges. The real estate speculation, buying property, the city is an ally, and if we work closely with them, we can stop a lot of those, because a lot of those buyers coming in to bid up the row houses, they want to add 2 or 3 stories. They want to build luxury condos, and the city can stop that through zoning. So there are lots of things we can do. So I'm more optimistic because I kind of relish being in the fight.
Love that. Thank you. So I'm going to see if there's any questions that we have from audience members and kind of open it up to taking some questions. So maybe we have time for one more question. So actually, maybe I'll go off a little bit on something, Lydia, you had mentioned, and I think I had a conversation with Andrew previously on, regarding like the affordable housing that is currently available in Chinatown for properties such as Taitong Village and Mass Pike Towers. I'll just maybe bring into this space, Tunny Lee. I recall, he was so passionate about telling and preserving the history of Chinatown, and also in the development of obviously being, one of the architects for Taitong Village. He pointed out to me that in the next few years, and it actually probably would be about now, that we would need to start looking at policy regarding the renewal of that, and I'm not a policymaker and I don't know what that is, but I'm curious if you could actually, if you could translate sort of what that is that something that needs to be, a caution?
Actually been quite fortunate in Chinatown. And again, I think a lot of it has been the collaboration of numerous community organizations and leaders, and with the city, a big role from the city in preserving the affordability of most of our large subsidized housing projects. So quite a few of our subsidized housing projects are actually in community ownership, with nonprofit owners that are committed to permanent affordability. And even some of those, like Mass Pike Towers, that are not owned by nonprofits, do have long-term commitments to affordability. In 2000, Trinity Financial, through a community organizing campaign, committed to a 70-year affordability term. And since then, actually a number of partners have worked together to get those the financing of those projects together so that they actually have those funds, in the form of subsidies. But I think the bigger challenge it is, the piece that AC/DC is really doing. It's like, where can we build more and more affordable housing? And then the other piece is, where can we find properties that are in the private market and actually take them off of the market? That's kind of like the next phase. And, I think taking it off the market, it's super challenging. But like Paul says, we have to look for those opportunities. And when there's any kind of up or down that allows us, to do that.
Yeah, and I think not only look for them, but really enlist the active support and aid from the city and the state, because the city can really exercise a lot of power over the buy-sell decision of a commercial developer. Because
so can the state, because we have
Mhm.
a bill before the state now called the Tenant Option to Purchase Act, which would say, if you're going to sell a building and it's multifamily, that you should give the tenants the first option,
Absolutely.
things like that, and that they could then partner with a nonprofit. A very basic concept, but could make a huge difference in preventing displacement.
That's great.
But with our track record of the different organizations in Chinatown having developed affordable housing for the last 30 or 40 years, we have a lot of expertise now, and we have a lot of friends in the affordable housing community and in the financing community. So we can get things done. We can mobilize a lot of support for it. But we have to be vigilant. We have to be active, and we have to work together.
Oh, that's great. I'm actually going to invite Lisa and Penny to join us back again so we can take on some of the questions that we are getting from audience members. Hi, Lisa and Penny.
Can I say one thing? Can I clone Paul and Lydia and bring you to DC and help us?
We're probably about 30 years too late.
Everybody's context is different too.
It's true. It is. It's not apples to apples.
Great.
I know. Just wishing.
Yeah. I mean, actually, this first question actually might be a bit of helping to support that. So this first question comes from Anne Hu, and they ask, thank you for bringing this great film. As an outsider visiting and hoping to preserve Chinatowns, how can we support the community in an appropriate way without infringing on the community's wants and needs?
I think to support the community, you have to support the businesses, whether they're big, whether they're small, whether you're a tourist, whether you're a resident, you go to the businesses and you buy their food, you buy their groceries, just support the businesses. That's the first start. And
you talk to them, you figure out, you ask them, how's business, been, right? And so for some of those folks that you don't talk to, I walk around every week, and then you see, oh my gosh, all of a sudden this restaurant is closed, right? Last week it was open. It's Saturday night. It should be open. What's going on? It's boarded up. There's no notice. So these are the things that we should be worried about, constantly. And not only that, but the grocery store, right? In Chinatown proper, we only have one last grocery store left. That begin to tell you and inform you, are we heading towards the kind of DC route? So these are all the kind of concerns that we have all the time. And then, if we have our ears to the ground, we hopefully would be able to understand what the problems are and be able to help out in whatever ways that we can, and not just be, kind of weekend residents, right? Go and only have your dim sum and buy, a few things, right? But be there.
Well, and I also think that, not all gentrifiers are the enemy here. And, we at ACDC have been trying to talk to a lot of the folks who are moving into some of the market rate units to give them an appreciation for the history of Chinatown, the importance of it, and, and where they say that they love the fact that they can live in an exotic neighborhood like Chinatown. Well, we say, well, the very fact that you're moving in, if you're not part of the community, you're actually, contributing to destroying that neighborhood. So, and so we asked our tenants to volunteer for community activities, to just participate in the community.
Yeah, I think anybody can volunteer and help the work of our organizations. I'm sure ACDC will welcome them. I'm sure we would certainly welcome them.
Thank you. And the next question we have is, with more projects like this documentary, I wonder, how do you as filmmakers think artists can use their strengths to better present the community's issues without overshadowing the community's voice?
I think this film was an excellent example. I just so appreciate both of you, Penny and Lisa, in how you really brought your talents to take the stories and lift them up, and in a really authentic way that does, really lift up the voices of the people who are there. So I just think that's a great example.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us as filmmakers, we ask the questions and then just kind of get out of the way and let the story unfold. I mean, when Penny and I first started the film and started interviewing people, pre-interviewing people, Penny was reticent, like, I don't think people are going to want to talk to us. And I said, disagree. People want to tell their stories. People, I mean, sure, you have to, get them to warm up a bit, but once they get going, it's like, you can't, I mean, that's why we have so many hours of footage, because people just want to talk and talk and talk and really share their stories. And, I think that there's been a great change, culturally for us in this country, where there is more inclusion, and, these voices, these stories need to be told, and they need to be heard, because, this way we understand each other. When people are wondering, like, what is this Black Lives Matter, this and that, it's like, well, you have to go back in history. You have to really go deep. We're not just talking about, yesterday, last week, a few years ago. This stuff is very deep. And, again, I think, for us, in terms of, as filmmakers trying to get these stories out, again, it's a matter of, finding people and then just letting them speak, and then, trying to pick and choose, what to put in the film, so that what we choose is impactful, and gets that message across.
Yeah, and we do try to keep it authentic. We did not bring in a narrator for this piece. We let the voices be the people we interviewed.
And that was a creative choice. I mean, initially, there was discussion of bringing a narrator, and I felt like, no, let's just everyone speak for themselves and let the story unfold that way.
Yeah, that's what we decided to do. So.
That's great. And I think, what I'm hearing from this conversation too, and even just in pulling from before too, that it's really about the relationships and the communication that you all implored through this art making process, that you really went to the communities and allowed, as you said, you didn't have a narrator. It allowed the audience to hear directly from the residents and the people who were impacted, or the activists and advocates that are on the front line, sort of pushing at this resistance. So I definitely would say, it reminds me of a quote. Forgive me if I'm butchering it, but it's, nothing about us without us. And I feel like that has been so key in regards to sort of making art that, working with community and helping to advance an agenda that is theirs and not yours if you're an outsider. Thank you. We have, so that's pretty much, unfortunately, all the time that we have. I did want to give a shout out to the POW Art Center in Chinatown, where I know a number of these interviews were taken. I know it's sort of the site of where ACDC has, developed a beautiful property of Greenway. As a person connected to various aspects, and with the film festival, very excited about what POW Art Center has been doing in working with and trying to build these bridges, also with ACDC, and all. There's so much more public art that have, the murals that are up now, encouraging people to definitely come into Chinatown and check those out and support Chinatown. There's a I love Boston, we love Boston Chinatown campaign that is currently still going, helping to support, the businesses and other folks who are struggling during this time. So thank you so much to everyone here, Paul, Lydia, Andrew, Penny, Lisa, for all of your contributions and commitment to advocating for, Chinatown and the history and the preservation. So excited that this film now exists. I feel like it will have a long life. Actually, maybe Penny and Lisa, if you could actually share sort of, what's up next, or sort of where the journey of this film is going to before we leave.
Sure. Thanks for asking. So it's still on its festival run. So we have a few more film festivals that it will be in. Definitely check out our website, THE.3CHINATOWNS.com to see where it will be next. And then we're currently talking to a few distributors about carrying the film for distribution next year and into the next few years. So that's our plan. If you do go to our website, you can also opt for private screenings, with the director or the executive producer or both. So that's also another option. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic.
We open up to educational institutions, universities and colleges if they would like to screen it for their Asian American studies programs or whatever.
Or American history. I mean, whatever. I mean, poli-sci, it covers so many different departments.
Yeah, urban development, sure. Yeah.
Urban development. I mean, yeah, all sorts.
Great. Oh, that's and are you on social media as well?
We have a Facebook page. We also have an Instagram feed. So yeah, so Facebook is really where we're most active.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us, and I'm so excited to have you all here, especially for our opening night. I think this is giving us a great sort of foundation to kind of go into a wonderful weekend that really is sort of exploring more stories that really represent and recognize the diversity of experiences within our communities. So thank you again so much. Really appreciate all of your work, and I just love this connection that we now have with Chicago and DC too.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And before we go, I'll just do the closing remarks here. Unfortunately, this is all we have time for today. And we're encouraging you all to join us for the festival through Sunday for an extended run of our shorts through October 31st. Please visit artsemerson.org to view our wonderful lineup, get tickets, and find more information. As a note, this film is actually up for an Audience Choice Award. So please cast your audience ballot by clicking on the button at the bottom of your screen in the previous viewing window that you were in, and let us know how much you loved the film. Thank you again for joining us this evening, and